Welcome, Leo Zagami, to the Biodigital Convergence Transhumanist Report. This is part two, man, and I'm really happy we're doing this again, right? Because I really respect you, and you really bring like a really incredible academic approach, like PhD level stuff, man. Like for just current events, because man, is it ever difficult to find out? Like people are looking for truth, right? Like it's just so hard to really get a good handle of what's going on. So again, welcome back to the show. And first and foremost, I want to emphasize that we are going to talk about your latest book, the new book, The Rise and Fall
Yeah,
of a Frankist Monster.
a
Yeah,
Franki
like
once.
Epstein, right? Like this guy just doesn't
I
go
just
away,
let,
right? So
let me hear it. I have it here.
yeah,
Here,
yeah, and I got it here too. Well, you can
here
kind of
it
see.
is. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
like I
glad that
mean,
you actually read it because not all the
I
people
did.
who interview me read the whole thing before interviewing me. So I really like to have an in-depth look into the whole thing with somebody who has shared this topic, has
Absolutely.
gone deep into it.
Yeah, well, this is a hot topic, right? I mean, because this is about exposing Epstein, right, and the most powerful Jewish sect in the world, right? I'd really never heard of the Sabbatean Frankists in the way that you described it in this book, and you've done a really excellent job to me, and it's relevant for today, right? And of course, I will say that I am pro-Israel, right? Like, and I'm a defender of Israel. And actually, for me personally, like I really abide by what's written in Romans 11. Like there's Ezekiel 36, 37, there's Zechariah 12, Jeremiah 16. I mean, I can go on, right? But anyway, I'll leave it at that, and I'm going to read your bio. Okay, so Leo Zagami is a writer, researcher, and the son of Dr. Elio Zagami, a well-known Jungian analyst, writer, and co-founder of GAPA, an independent group of analytical psychology, of which he was president. His grandfather, Senator Leopoldo Zagami, a Cilician politician, was also a known historian and author who married into the aristocratic family of the Marquis de Gregorio. Wow, like Leo's mother, Jessica Leon Young, is a member of the family of the Queen Mother of England. Her father, Henry Leon Young, was also a writer. Felicity Mason, her mother, Leo's maternal grandmother, helped Leo develop his talents from a young age. Felicity was a collaborator and friend of avant-garde eccentrics such as William Burroughs and Brian Gysin. She
Brian
was also,
Geisen, actually, who, by the way, was Canadian aside from
oh
other
really?
things.
Oh, that's
So,
interesting. Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, interesting stuff going on up here, right? Okay, anyway, yeah, she was also known under the pseudonym Anne Cumming. That made her famous in the 80s as a controversial novelist after working for many years in the cinema business with prestigious figures such as Fellini and Zeffirelli. Zagami, who is known for a brilliant career as Leo Young in the media and music industry as a record producer, became quickly popular on the web in 2006 because of his direct involvement in the New World Order and secret societies known to the majority of us as the Illuminati. His blog rose quickly and gained attention from people such as David Icke for its accurate, fully documented, groundbreaking inside information. Between '09 and 2013, Zagami published books in Europe and Japan based on a variety of subjects that range from the history of secret societies and the Vatican to geopolitical matters concerning the New World Order. In 2013, he collaborated with well-known Italian journalists Ferruccio Pinotti and Giacomo Galeazzi in drafting a chapter for the Italian bestseller Vaticano Massoni, which was released in May 2013, dedicated to the secretive world of Vatican Freemasonry. So Zagami has collaborated with a series of articles and scopes for InfoWars and was the protagonist of a highly successful documentary made by Alex Jones in Rome called Demonic Possession of the Vatican Exposed. Leo also was one to reveal to the world on InfoWars the gay Vatican drug/orgy in the summer of 2017, which forced mainstream media to later cover the story. After publishing many books in Italy and Japan with great success, he reached the English-speaking public thanks to a book deal made with San Francisco's CCC Publishing that made Leo's first translated works available in the English language. Leo Zagami has written over a dozen books, including the bestseller Pope Francis, The Last Pope, released in the US by CCC Publishing. In 2019, Leo moved to Palm Springs, California with his wife, Christy, who runs the Cursum Perficio publishing house to avoid political and religious persecution in Europe. His latest book, Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 12, Volume 4, Volume 5, and Volume 6.66, Volume 7, Volume 9, Volume 10, and Volume 11 were written in the English language, not translated from Italian like previous books. So yeah, that's
And the latest one, because the latest one is actually outside of the Confession series. It's a new book. It starts a new process. In fact, I actually asked if you had updated your bio. I might have to send you the latest bio because
okay. Okay,
it's
yeah, that wasn't the latest. Okay.
yeah, no, because I have simply started a new course of action, having finished the Confession series with the volume 12, as you know, which we discussed on the
Yep.
Jesuits. Now I am opening up a series of essays who want to dig deep into topics, of course, like secret societies, the Vatican, various sectarian realities, and so on. But of course, at times not as personal as the Confession series were, because the Confession series had always very much an element of biography within them. And instead, when it comes down to my latest book, maybe that element is a little bit less because it's more of an essay, as you had the possibility of reading it yourself. So just to puntualize on this thing, because you see, it's my first book outside of the Confession series. However, like you pointed out yourself, I also had a bestseller like Pope Francis, The Last Pope, which was also outside of the Confession series, and also Invisible Master. So I hope that people will really take on reading this book, because I think it has very pertinent information, very relevant information to the times we are living.
100%. Like it's really like I've seen even the dynamics on social media has changed. Like especially regarding Israel. Israel is just the hot topic of the world. Like especially on social media. I mean, the war is being fought. You can call it the propaganda war, and it's really interesting what's seeing. There's a great divide happening too, and I'm going to call the Christian community over what's going on with Israel, right? With I call it the Church of Tucker Carlson. That's not my original thinking, but like Candace Owens, and I mean, they're recognizing right that there are certain factions within Judaism, if you will, right, that are outright like there's something really wrong here, right? And with your work, I call it like a great sifting, if you will, because the issue I have with a lot of individuals online is that they create this broad stroking judgment on everyone, right, for actions that they've captured. Okay, maybe of a particular group. Like it's kind of like this, let me put it this way. It's sort of like, well, I'm going to hate all white people because of what the KKK did, right? Stuff like that, right? Instead of kind of honing right in on the specific individuals in the group, within the group, if you will, and then dealing with them accordingly. Like, and to me, like, I guess one of my first questions was when I first looked at the title of your book, like, I didn't even know, like Jacob Frank or Sabbatai Zivi, right? All these people, right, that I'd never even really heard of. But you've really kind of pointed it out and distinguished between, like, I'm going to say, like Torah observing Jews, like the ones that would look to what was delivered at Sinai, from like how it's like this quote unquote progressivism and liberalism that turned into labor Zionism. Like I'm not the expert, right? I've just learned a lot more because of people like you, right? So I don't know if you want to weigh in, because Zionism, like again, people like talk about Zionism, and to different groups that means different things, right? I mean, so that's been like, because when I talk to an
But
individual,
I think that, speaking with people who were actually within the Jewish community, formerly religious Zionists, and have recently really changed their minds, even themselves, about certain things, because they have realized how religious Zionism was played just as an element of something that the Sabbatean Frankists created. Like, like you said, very few people discuss Sabbatean
No,
Frankism.
yeah,
Even, for example, in countries like Poland, something really weird happened there because where we don't really have a lot of testimony in other countries, in Poland, where we have actually, and I state that in my book, a larger amount of, let's say, historic testimony about the Sabbatean Frankists. Even there, it seems like at one point, the Sabbatean Frankists themselves went around their own, the members of their own sect to retrieve any possible relic like the image of Eve Frank or anything that could compromise the future of these families who became so important within the elite of their own country. And this happened in Poland, but probably happened also in Austria or many other countries. So it's almost like they deliberately hid their, usually people are proud of their own ancestry, of their own religious identity. This doesn't happen with the Sabbatean Frankists because of the controversy surrounding their practices, their, seemingly orgiastic practices in reality hid a well-defined ritualistic purpose. And so for that
yeah,
reason, it's easier to simply say, oh, well, Jago Frank or his predecessor, Shabbatai Zevi, were just a bunch of perverts. But that's not how it is. They dug very much a big hole within Judaism. And that hole is still present with us today, that crack
yeah,
into the system of Judaism with its rabbinical schools, with its perceived perfection since the time of Moses. So, aside from the Ten Commandments, we have 613 laws that usually, an Orthodox Jew follows. But for these people who actually broke with their religion, they made it a purpose to actually, eat pork on the holy days,
yeah,
do things that were completely contrary to what was taught to them from Moses' times. That means that in the end, we need to really understand that this book has nothing anti-Semitic about it, as you have
no,
witnessed yourself by reading it. And that's why I said at the beginning of this interview, I think it's important that I give an interview with somebody like you who has really gone through the book, taken his time to analyze it before interviewing me. And I applaud you for that because it's a very good thing to do as a journalist or as a researcher of sorts.
yeah,
So, in my case, as you know, I had a personal experience which I described in my confessions. Often I mention the Sabbatean Frankists during the confession series, but this is the first time that I really go full on deep into exposing who they are in a way that is not, I mean, it has an academic basis, like you said, because I don't want it to be debunked and thrown out of the window
yeah,
like simply, the creation of a conspiracy theories. Up until now, there has been nobody who has been able to debunk a word that I have written because I rely on sources, even from the Jewish world, even from the academic Israeli world, which are very much perceived as credible, serious. However, it's also true that, for example, the Jews themselves, the rabbinical community, have had problems in talking even about Sabbatean Frankism. And that is really what makes it, I think, difficult even more for the outside world to understand what's going on with this sectarian reality, which started as a movement because when Shabbatai Zevi came around, it was a time in which the Jews were really searching for a Messiah. But how was also a Messiah that would bring them back to Israel? And this is also the other element here. Within the frames of normal Judaism, there wasn't this, they were not even eager to go back to Israel until last century. I mean, and I describe this when I describe the very birth of Zionism from something that people perceive as simply a movement within Judaism as something which is actually connected to Puritans, to the Anglican Church, to the Freemasons, and it spans over 500 years. And it goes back to people like Manasseh ben Israel, who was called the ambassador of the Jews, who eventually, with Oliver Cromwell, managed to finally get the English to let the Jews back into England. After a few hundred years, they had been kicked out of the British Isles. During the brief time, it was a republic under Oliver Cromwell. So, I mean, we're talking here about the history, you know. I mean, people, when they hear about Oliver Cromwell, they don't typically associate this this gentleman with a figure that has anything to do with Jewish history, but it has very much to do with Jewish history. Because let's not forget, if the Jews were not let back into England, then the whole movement to let them back into Israel will never have gained momentum. And so it's very important to describe these historical elements. Having said that, once again, I want to stress there's nothing anti-Semitic simply because we're not talking about a race here. We're not, generalizing. And unfortunately, like we were saying in private before starting this show, the big problem here is that a lot of journalists don't have the time to go into the depths of theologic, religious, as well as geopolitical or sectarian realities, like, somebody who, like me, maybe, let's say, spends hours and hours and hours in his research, on one topic at a time.
Yeah.
I know because I also been a journalist. I know how it works. It's always about the news coming in, the news coming in, the news being elaborated, you and the news having to follow the course of what is happening in the now. When you are actually writing a book like this, is actually about connecting what happened with what is happening now and what was going to happen later. Because you see, when I write a book takes time to write, and at the same time, it's published in a specific moment that you have to envision already in your head. Like when I envisioned earlier this year that Pope Francis was about to die, and I thought, Volume 12 was the perfect book to really explain how the Jesuits hijacked the church, how we will have to then explain what is next for the Catholic Church, which is exactly manifesting now with a Pope which is even more left and woke than Pope Francis in a way. But having said that, the Epstein book was something I always wanted to do because I knew that behind the facade of this scandal, there was something deeply disturbing, more of an historic, anthropological nature, connected with his ancestry, connected with the milieu that surrounded him. In the end, this book demonstrates that Jeffrey Epstein is the product of something much bigger, and is that much bigger and those powerful people. It's not about Trump here. Trump is somebody who is in the White House. And of course, once you are in the White House, you are already sitting on a lot of compromises that you have to do if you don't want to end up like a JFK or if you don't want to have your life threatened once again, like he had himself in the past. So I think that by writing this book, first of all, I want to state that, people who are watching me, who might think that the Epstein case has become a tool of the left or a democratic hoax, is not like that. And actually, this book has been out since the end of October. It's something that I finished writing, of course, in October, but I had already envisioned that by the time it will come out, there will be a lot of more discussions about the so-called Epstein files, the Epstein saga, And at the same time, of course, the synchronicity brings us also to have a movie in the theaters, Frankenstein, which itself has a heavy element of symbology and allegory to do with the Sabbatean Frankist, which most people don't know about. The connection with the golem, which was this creature created of clay that the Jews have in their folklore, and also is very much connected to alchemy, to magical practices. So in the end, here we have a state which is Israel, which, like you said, no, we personally myself, I've always been a supporter of Israel uh, because I know that it's surrounded by a lot of hate, a lot of things to do with
Yeah.
Muslim world. But in the end, we have to also understand that the people who were pushed to colonize Israel were the first victims of the Sabbatean Frankists. And like my friend, late friend Barry Kamish said, it is a Sabbatean state. Now that might offend some people who don't have, like you, the perception of things. So I'm glad that you had a look at the book before interviewing me, that you have also the open mind to realize that there is actually some problems here. That
Yeah.
you know maybe this growing Jewish hate or anti-Semitism and stuff is triggered from something that, and of course, then once we realize that the Sabbatean Frankist past is fueled with anti-Semitism, is fueled with pushing the anti-Semitic card every time they want to persecute their fellow Jews, because the main enemy of the Jews is the Jew. And this is,
It's interesting.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I have to highlight that I've never ever encountered anyone that was able to kind of highlight that fact the way that you've done. And I feel like what you've done is really important. At least it because there
I mean,
is,
I think it's very important, but the problem is because in the world we are living is divided in factions, because they
yeah,
don't accept that at times there is a gray area, because at times
yeah,
people just want to take it the easy way. So, either they stand like a Nick
yeah.
Fuentes, who is kind of, you know, even becoming an Hitler apologist. When you read this book, it becomes ridiculous because Adolf Hitler himself is a product of the Sabbatean Frankists. So, I mean, the transfer agreement was a product of the Sabbatean Frankists.
That's interesting too. Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
So,
Yeah, no, yeah,
once you go into that and you realize all that, I think you see, when I talk, for example, in this book about Edwin Black and his transfer agreement book, how he himself felt very awkward to expose something like this after what happened with the Holocaust, to expose the fact that there was actually a Zionist element in the transfer agreement, a deal made between Hitler and the Zionists, that there was compromise from the biggest Jewish fraternal organization known as the B'nai Brit. That is something that I go very much deep into, for example. But I mean, it's like when people discuss these kind of topics, because they have an idea, it has to be this way. They go into a topic already with a preconceived mind. Now, I
yeah,
invite the reader to not do that, to
yeah.
open
You
their
do.
mind. And that opening your mind to something different will make you realize that here there is a lot of untold truths that in the end, because I think that in the end today, the first victims of the Sabbatean Frankists are the people of Israel who have been forced into going and colonizing a country that they didn't necessarily want to colonize. Let's not forget the way they were rejected by other countries when they were persecuted. And if you persecute a whole race, and the only way to survive in their minds become having this state, no? And they don't realize that they themselves have been played, though, like I show in my book. So we have, on a way, of course, we have Christian Zionism, which is born out also of a prophetic mindset which is aimed to bring the Jews back before the end times so we manifest the return of Jesus. And I understand that. But in reality, we should also understand that these people have behind the scenes work in a way that history was made in their liking so they could manifest those scriptures. And at times it can be a hard realization. But then in the end, you realize also that it's the work of God, because God will not have let it happen if it wasn't in any way in his idea
Mhm.
to manifest all this. To have in the end the state of Israel in the end times doing what it's doing. Um, but there is a big problem, of course, when you have the level of manipulation that we have now, and when the majority of the Israeli people don't really know much about their own history,
Mhm.
which is another big problem. You see, I cite Jewish sources often.
Yeah.
And that doesn't it makes it very difficult then for the critics to go there and debunk me because I'm not citing Adolf Hitler. I'm not citing some kind of biased source. I'm citing their own sources who are worried about the fact that in the end they shouldn't be an Orthodox Jew, a liberal Jew, a progressive Jew, or there shouldn't be a movement that goes towards the left or on the right in Israel. There should be only one Israel, the Israel that was created when they went to the promised land with Moses. That and the laws that were given to them by God. When you break with that, you
Yeah.
are no longer really yourself. I mean, then at that point, it becomes easy for the enemy of the Jews, which are, like I said, at times the Jews themselves, because when the Sabbatean Frankists create their sect, then their next idea was like, okay, now after 1666, Shabbatai Zevi, as you know, connected with the Muslim world, he um, he became a Muslim officially.
Yeah.
So he was rejected by a large part of the Jewish population at that point. And that is the moment in which it's no longer a movement, but it becomes a sect,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
before it was more than half of Judaism worldwide that recognized him as a Messiah. The moment in which he
Mhm.
goes there because of the Sultan who imposes him to accept the Muslim religion of having himself, of getting killed, showing also weakness, by the way, because I think that if Shabbatai Zevi was a real Messiah, like Jesus, he would have said, okay, kill me.
Yeah. I agree.
No.
Yeah.
And the same thing can be said about Jacob Frank. And Jacob Frank actually picks up from Sabbatai Zevi, and then he constructs this little court of his in Offenbach outside of Frankfurt. He becomes the guide for all those Jews who gradually are distancing themselves from religion and become more and more secularized. We have to understand that Zionism, it's born as it's born as a compromise between secularism and religious, and the religious side of things. But in reality, the people who were behind the movement were secularized. They didn't really care about the religion. They care about putting together the state of Israel for their own interest, possibly also to avoid further persecution in their perceived idea that maybe having a state will protect them. But it was behind the scenes a great manipulation that was ongoing. You see, when you, for example, study my book, you understand that the Jews were persecuted. They were persecuted with the pogroms, they were persecuted with the Holocaust. They were made to go back to Israel because still in the 1930s, early 1930s, before the transfer agreement, still a lot of Jews didn't want to go back to Israel. So that is something that is important to realize, I think, that in a way, now that Israel exists, you cannot say from the river to the sea because they have been victims of a tragedy that killed millions of people. You see? But the problem is that the way that this whole anti-Semitism is growing,
Oh yeah.
it's also actually becoming fuel for those Holocaust deniers, for those people who despise a whole race which
Yeah.
didn't, I mean, a whole race that is victims to these people, like the Rothschild, like the Schiff, like all the various banking families that then we discover from this book were behind Jacob Frank from the very beginning. That's why he
Yeah.
made his headquarters before the end of his life in the proximities in what is considered part of the Frankfurt metropolitan area, which is the home of the main banking families of today's banking system. And I'm not talking only about the Rothschild, though the Rothschild, of course, are very prominent. So when we have Jeffrey Epstein in all this, Jeffrey Epstein is a manifestation and a creation of today's Sabbatean Frankists that very much we find not only in politics, they're very abundant in politics, but we have them abundant especially in Hollywood, where they have promoted for decades a complete a vision that is completely antithetic to the Mosaico-Sinaic laws. I mean, Woody Allen is not a religious Jew. He's a Sabbatean Frankist. He's a Satanist, if we want to say it in
Yeah.
Christian terms. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. I get what you're saying, man. I mean,
Um,
yeah.
so it's like, I mean, we have Steven Spielberg, we have all these people who are have imposed, of course, their own views, but at the same time, if you dare criticizing them, you are anti-Semite. Now, I want to be very careful about.
Yeah.
In fact, at one point in my book, I say to
You
the
do, yeah.
I directly say to the ADL, if that's your idea to brand me an anti-Semite, remember that this book relies on your source, on sources which are not, you will not be able to debunk so easily. In fact, I think that what's happening now with this book is that they want to ignore it. They don't want this book to have any relevance, especially they don't want this book to appear in Israel.
Right.
There
Yeah.
is an amount of, I mean, like I said to you, there is in private also, there is Jews who are accepting this book, people from the Hasidic community. This is of great joy for me, it's a great,
Yeah.
but they're also noticing that there is a lot of resistance.
Mhm.
And so, because this book is saying some truths that are demonstrated by the fact that I have, as you know, at the end of the book, pages and pages and pages of citations,
Yeah.
footnotes. So people can continue the research, but they can also verify if my information in any way is not
That's
correct.
right.
So, and I think that what they're trying to do at the moment is to ignore it.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that's going to be so easy in the long run, because this book might now be, no, I mean, it went number one in history of Judaism and many other categories related to Judaism on Amazon. It has a, you know, uh, good reviews up until now. People seem to appreciate it and all that. There is no criticism, but at the same time, I noticed that, for example, big names like Alex Jones or other names want to just ignore the whole topic simply because then it falls into the whole political shenanigans that is going on with Trump now.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, Trump like I said in the book, might not necessarily be involved in any criminal activity. But unfortunately, the people who are part of the establishment that
Yeah.
is financing both the Democrats and the Republicans and everything in Washington, well, they are very much part of this whole. They don't want this. I mean, they have been avoiding this discussion. I mean, and I don't want to make names. I had a big guy from a very prestigious show who contacted me, wanted, but then at the last minute he canceled. And this has happened over and over in the last few weeks.
Mm.
It's like, yes, there is people who have courage to go forward, but there is also people who are fearing that, being associated with this book would put them in the anti-Trump category. Now, you read this book. I don't think there is anything anti-Trump
No,
about this book.
no. I mean, it's very fair. Like if you're going to pursue truth, like you, I mean, the work you did too with the Jesuits, like the things that you're not just going after, like it's not you do it right. And I'll say that with all my heart because the way that you do it is right. And to me, like if you're like a soldier for God, if I can put it that way, that's what you do. And you're not claiming fire and brimstone down from heaven, right? You're just presenting information
Mm.
about like in a very factual way, right? Like yeah, and you cite your sources, and sometimes the truth, man, and you're not calling for broad stroking judgment. You're just presenting um a portion of the story that I think needs to be understood, and actually it's I call it the great sifting. Like it's a sifting. It's intelligent and it's needed because too many people on like they're just so binary. It's like they just become a zero or a one, but it's not as simple as that, right? Like it's about sifting out within all the groups, within all the nations of the world. um but we're getting into other things here, but like that's the way I view it. And yes, like the Sabbatean Frankists, in the way that you've done that, this is right to me. Like this is appropriate because, like you said, like if you actually, I've read the Old Testament, right? The Torah, right? Like I mean, I know, and the reason they were handed over to judgment initially was because of breaking the covenant, which I probably would have done myself, right? So it's not, I'm not calling for judgment in that sense, but that's how the story goes, right? And we live such short
I mean,
lives, but
you had elements like Sodom and Gomorrah, which are
yeah,
clearly
yeah,
elements in which we see the vengeance of God once,
yeah, you do, yeah,
no, but we also see that this God, especially like I said, in the Pentateuch, what we call
yeah. The
in
first five books,
Judaism
yeah,
the Torah, it's evident that there is a God
yeah,
that gets angry over and over again because these people just don't seem to get it at times. And so
a
there is
a
a
hundred
panic.
percent,
Okay.
yeah,
But the problem is in regards to Sabbatean Frankism is that when Sabbatai Zevi comes along and then Jago Frank, they bring also a new Torah because there is also the oral
yeah.
Torah and a new interpretation, which at times, like I stated, is completely, I mean, it's just like out of
It's
analysis,
the opposite.
Crowley novel with King David having an homosexual act in the I mean, things that
Yeah,
are, and I didn't even want to go too far into all the perverted teachings of it all, but
yeah,
I at least gave to the reader without, breaking his head, possibly with 1,000 names and 1,000 different, I
yeah,
tried to make him understand that the way that the Sabbatean Frankists were bringing themselves out of Judaism didn't really damage only Judaism, because then, they link with Islam. Then you have Shabbatai Zevi, who at that point creates the Dommeh, which are these crypto Jews who claim they are Muslims outwards, but they continue to practice endorse their own form of Sabbateanism. And then you have in Thessaloniki, Jacob Frank arrives, and then you had Baruch Russo, who was the second guy who claimed to be after the death of Shabbatai Zevi, the guy who claims to be the reincarnation, and after him, of course, is Jacob Frank. But Jacob Frank doesn't really want to keep himself simply within the Muslim Ottoman Empire kind of, he wants to go beyond that. He wants to go into the Catholic world. He wants to create this Edom, this new way of viewing the Shekinah, which is like viewing the Virgin Mary, and it creates like this worship of the Shekinah or Shekinah, however you want to pronounce it, which is very much the worship of the Virgin Mary. In fact, he associated with the Holy Mary of Czestochowa, which is also very, as I described, a very important connection to Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, because then this book is also about them. It's also about going into why is Ghislaine Maxwell so revered by this sect that she's not being killed, she's being treated like royalty within her own prison. When you read this book, you realize that she had a role. She wasn't just this, the daughter of Robert Maxwell. She was the daughter of somebody who, of course, was part of this sectarian reality that had been hidden at this point. See, the problem with contemporary Jewish scholars is that they have not been able to trace links at times with, where this Sabbatean Frankist ended up, simply because, like I said earlier, traces were deliberately taken away so that people couldn't, if I went into a house of a Sabbatean Frankist family and I saw the image of Jacob Frank or Yves Frank or Shabbatai Zevi, I would automatically say these people are not traditional Jews, they are something different.
Yeah, that's right.
But instead they omitted all that, but they taken that away. They actually deliberately went from house to house to take away that evidence. And then when this evidence was found by outside people, it was very rare and scarce. And also there is a lot of omissions by the rabbinical community because they don't want to say this or this other guy from our school has been corrupted by Sabbatean Frankism.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
it's a little bit like, make this parallel, is a little bit like the popes and the cardinals. If we go into the history, for example, Pope Francis, in his episcopal consecration lineage, we find Cardinal Rampolla. Cardinal Rampolla was also a Freemason. He was actually given by Alistair Crowley the role of saint in his Catholic Gnostic Church. He was actually considered even a member of the OTO because he had been linked to these Egyptian rites that then become the core of the future Ordo Templi Orientis. But today, you will never hear criticism towards this figure in the Catholic Church because otherwise it will jeopardize the people after him in the episcopal consecration that gets all the way to another pope, to a pope, because Cardinal Rampolla was about to become pope and didn't become pope, but then Pope Francis became pope a long time after him. I'm talking about the consecration that goes from the moment Jesus through St. Peter and then transmits the church to not only his apostles, but his successors. And those successors are claimed to be valid, and you can't jeopardize in the eyes of the church. You can't jeopardize the whole church by starting criticizing this or this other pope, because then it will. Nowadays, within the history of the Catholic Church, they maybe, the Borgias, because it was so evident the level of corruption, of perversion that, it became like. But then there were many other popes that were not really. So this is a little bit like in the rabbinical schools. I explained how there was a real war against the Sabbatean Frankists, waged at the very start, actually, of Sabbateanism by rabbis, especially in the Ashkenazi community, who realized the danger of this heresy and started issuing rabbinical councils, calling these people who were practicing these rituals, these deviants, swapping wives and all that. And I explained in this book that there was
Yeah.
actually a whole movement of people who were trying to fight somehow this whole thing. I don't think that in the end they were successful, though. I think that in the end, unfortunately, they failed because there is here in the course of this book we realize that first of all we have the Dome, okay, in the Turkish Ottoman Islamic, then in Podolia we have Jago Frank, and but then with Jago Frank we have parts of his followers who become Catholic, but then we have also parts of his followers that stay within the Jewish community and they become part of the Hasidic community, of the Orthodox community. So they bring that
Yeah.
gradually, those communities, to accept the message of Jacob Frank, but maybe in a more veiled way. However, today it is generally accepted by historians that Jacob Frank and Sabbatai Zevi were heavily influential within the Zionist movement. Because also my book explains that Sabbatai Zevi didn't just walk up and become the Messiah, but he had a father called Mordecai Zevi that nobody ever talks about, that worked for the for for the Brits and for the Puritans in England, who had this idea that they had to bring the Jews back to Israel to manifest the end times.
Mhm.
So it is like in the end, of course, God's will to get all these things done. And of course, now we have the state of Israel. And of course, also, we shouldn't criticize necessarily the state of Israel because it is they are the victims, the inhabitants of it, of this whole manipulation game that pushed them from wherever they were living in Russia, in England, in this and there, in Germany. They got pushed into going back to, to finish their diaspora forcefully. If the Jews were living tranquil in Germany without the Holocaust, or in Russia without the pogroms, in other parts of Europe, I think that Israel will have been probably very scarce in Jewish people because Jewish people
Mhm.
didn't, like I expect, this concept might seem controversial for some, especially for some Christian Zionists. But it is the truth. It is the truth that then we also see with the transfer agreement, which manifests in a time in which B'nai Brit also, the identity of B'nai Brit, which is a Masonic, quasi-Masonic order that I uh, talk about in the book, very important in our story also with Jeffrey Epstein, because then the mega group founded by Lex Wexner becomes like the Illuminati of their own form of Freemason, which is the B'nai Brit. They were the ones who didn't believe immediately Adolf Hitler could be a threat, simply because they let it happen because Adolf Hitler himself was a Sabbatean Frankist product. And that is controversial. I mean, still to this day, when you say Adolf Hitler was partly Jew, so at this point, this makes also people like Nick Fuentes look like complete fools because if you're praising a guy who himself actually was a Jew and a Sabbatean Frankist, you're a complete idiot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you also touched on the quote unquote Khazarian mafia. I
Ah,
like that you did address that too, because that's a big one, right? That's another big one, and a little bit
another
on the
big
protocols.
big conspiracy that we always hear. I think that even when I actually did in last few weeks a lot of it, still a lot of interviews to promote this book, there was still occasionally somebody who brought up this topic. And I immediately said, listen, you need to read the book because, this book explains that the Khazarians were never a race. They were never, sorry, the Khazarian Jews were never a race. They just simply embraced a religion. That doesn't make you a Jew. A Jewish identity is also defined by their DNA. That DNA can be Ashkenazi, can be Sephardic, can be Yemeni Jew, can be Ethiopian Jew, but those are specific DNA, traceable DNAs. You can't trace the Khazarians. Unfortunately, because there was no DNA studies 100 years, 150 years ago, this whole thing crept even inside the Jewish milieu of of various rabbis who at one point even themselves started to say, well, yeah, the Khazarians have a link with the Ashkenazi, or maybe this and that.
Yeah, the theories
Nowadays,
started. Yeah.
nowadays it's all been debunked. The Khazarians, it was a beautiful country that did a diplomatic move to, instead of embracing Islam or Christianity, finding themselves squashed between these two realities because
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
literally squashed by these two realities, geographically speaking. They said, okay, we're going to embrace Judaism. So then we're not going to make anybody upset. We're not going to make
Yeah.
the Christian
You,
upset. We're not going to make the Muslims upset. We're simply going to say we are Jews. We embrace Judaism. And that because Judaism is recognized within the Quran, it makes it possible to not have, it's not like deemed completely infidel in their eyes. And at
right.
the time
Yeah.
for the Christians, Jesus was a Jew, everything. So,
Yeah.
but I repeat, it was important for me to bring in the book the latest
Yeah.
DNA studies and to
Yeah.
see debunk this Khazarian myth, which is circulating and has been circulating for decades in the conspiracy circles. And it kind of like, I mean, even from serious researchers that I saw like serious researchers, suddenly they come up with this thing, and I'm like, oh my God.
Well, it's good. It's good. Like the way you addressed it, I thought it was. Yeah. I didn't know that that was going to be in there, but yeah, it was good.
Yeah,
Nice.
and I mean, it was important to address it because
Yeah.
it also links to the fact that the Ashkenazi, which are often linked with the Khazarians, and I explained that they have nothing to do with the Khazarians, but they are often linked by the conspiracy theorists
Yeah.
and blamed for all the ills of the world. They were actually the ones who first fought against the Sabbateans.
Hmm. It's interesting. Yeah.
Actually, it puts you a little bit like in a condition to say, oh, maybe I got it wrong. But
Well,
especially,
and yeah, man, I have to weigh in on this. This is part of the problem today. It's like, when you're a child, you're used to being wrong, right? Like, I mean, you're used to being corrected, and then it's like we get older and then we don't get as much intervention per se, and then we start thinking, oh, well, I'm just right about things. No, no, big mistake right there, right? Most people, no, it's just you don't have that corrective force like working in your life as much as when you did when you were a child, unless you know how to come to what I'm going to say evidence-based conclusions. Like to me, I feel like your way of thinking makes sense. At least you can create, well, when you write your books, you can tell us why you make the statements you make, or explain why you've come to these ways of thinking. And I mean, I think that's how the mind should work, not
yeah,
just like,
and I tell you,
yeah,
for many years, I had people saying, oh, Leo Zagami is a Zionist. Oh, Leo Zagami is this because he likes Israel, but at the same time, he's talking bad about the Muslims. I'm not talking necessarily bad about the Muslims. I wrote a whole book about the Muslims, and
yeah,
actually, I
yeah.
took praise from the Muslim world because it's so factual that even a sheikh dedicated a video on YouTube to this book, and nobody
Yeah.
actually gave me 5 stars, even the Sufis, which I criticized. So I was kind of shocked because I thought there would be a much more like, they would have probably done a fatwa on me and I would have ended up like
Well,
something.
yeah, yeah.
No, instead, I was like invited to Dubai. People like are saying, why don't you come and visit
Mm,
us, this or this other Muslim countries to give us a lecture about this and that. So that was kind of surprising. Um, but even with this book, I have problems in promoting it because it's hard for people to digest the whole thing with their binary mindset. And
Yeah,
and of course, it has also the Sabbatean Frankist element, which is connected to then the promotion of this protocols of the sages of Zion. What happened later on with the protocols became, current, reading and material of study in most universities in the Middle East or in Iran or in other places. So, I mean, it creates then that hate
yeah,
element that
a
we see.
100%. And I mean, and the question becomes, is this all staged, right? And I mean, like, of course, most people would say, yeah, it's like playing, they call it the checkerboard, right? But with real people, right? I mean, it very much seems that way to me, but
I mean, it's like I've been in the Middle East. I had the possibility to spend time there. I had the possibility to spend time with some great people who made me
yeah,
realize a lot of things. I talk about it also in Volume 10, of course, especially in Volume 10, because it's more part of the confession series. So it's like, uh, but having said that, my experiences with all three the Abrahamic faiths have not only been purely academic, they have been also a very personal nature. And for that reason, I actually am very grateful to God who has given me this possibility to grow up in a family that was very open-minded with a big background
yeah,
in studies of an esoteric nature and so on, but also gave me the possibility to, I had the relative who was Jew, the relative who was Christian, the relative who was, and then I got involved with the Islamic world myself directly. I ended
yeah,
up even having a child who I never saw again. And this is evidence that probably they talk about being a religion of peace and of tolerance and all that. But like I said in this book, when I said you might say I'm anti-Semitic, I said, bear with me a second. My personal story proves that I am not a friend person of
no,
the Muslims.
that's
But having said that, I'm not also a bigot who criticizes everything without taking what is good in those,
yeah, a
maybe
100%.
teachings, those, because I saw some beautiful things in the Muslim world that I liked. And I think that the Muslim world has also influenced very much not only the esoteric world, but through the Renaissance, Hermeticism, everything that was preserved in a way from the Iberic Peninsula, where then we had the scourge with the Christian Inquisition. And that is another element that I bring out also in my book when I start talking about the Marranos, the Conversos, and the fact that there was this guy who for the first time brings in with a book this French theologian and anthropologist Isaac Lapierre, who in reality we discovered being a Jew, a Marranos, but I also explain no, that the Jewish Marranos are the ones who converted, but in reality they practice Judaism in secret, while the conversos embrace Christianity. And then, so there was this element at the very basis of then this alliance that then grow. This alliance grows in England, doesn't grow in any other place. It is there that eventually, it grows through a few centuries. They even create British Israelism because it was like they went from kicking out the Jews altogether
Hmm.
to
And then
to actually embrace them as
yeah,
and to actually say we are the lost tribe, we are the lost tribes here, we're the lost tribes. I mean,
and then the Balfour Declaration came out.
and then but all it was to arrive to this Balfour Declaration. We have a few hundred years of history, which I also describe in my book,
Mhm.
because without
It's
understanding that history, we cannot understand how a country completely turned around and embraced what they actually had despised before.
yeah, I think everyone should read your books because you're not a polarizing individual, which is very rare. Because yeah, like you talk about, yeah, I've noticed you talk about everything, and like it's unique. Like, and I think it's well needed. Like, And I'm really hoping like
I mean, and then you
it'll
have like all the other part that we will obviously we don't have time now to discuss, but we have all the
no.
part of influence that these teachings, Sabbatean Franki's teachings, had upon the esoteric world and the world
Hmm.
of secret societies, from Aleister Crowley to Madame Blavatsky to Eliphas Levi to all the way to more recent times to Anton Levi, to Anton LaVey. So, I mean, it's like
Yeah.
without
It,
these people, we will probably have a completely different world because
yeah. We For sure. I mean, but you're an educator, right? You're like a professor. So I mean, I really appreciate it. I appreciate what you do because it helps. It helps those
uh,
who are looking. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I accept criticism if the
sure.
criticism is the right criticism. You know, if somebody comes to me and says, "I don't stand by what you said here," I don't. I actually
Yeah.
accept that. But if actually you bring me even evidence of some wrong statement on my side, I will definitely then embrace it and correct myself in the future. But like I said, before writing these books, I give it a lot of thought into
Mhm.
it. I try to cross-reference different sources. I don't really rely only on one source. When it comes down to the transformation of Judaism, the transformation of Judaism is what gives us today transgender rabbis, women rabbis. This is not Judaism. This is a joke.
Uh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
if the majority of Jews are embracing that joke, well, it's a bad joke, and you are abandoning what Judaism used to be. And then at that point, you deserve to be persecuted. I'm sorry, because then is an
Yeah.
easy game then for the Muslim world to say these people are living in sin. These people are abandoning their own belief. These people are not really people of the book any
You,
longer.
it, you couldn't have said it better than that. And
Uh,
when you look at the history in the Old Testament, right? Like when the people abandoned the word of God, which we're seeing that again now, right? Like I'm not sure how this is all going to unfold in North America, but
Sure.
when you abandon biblical morality, like I would say the New Testament highlights what that is in the highest form.
Yeah.
We will be handed over to judgment, and like you just mentioned too, right? Like when certain groups within Islam see the degree of depravity at work, not only within the Sabbatean Frankists, but just in the West in general, right? Like you were delivered up to your enemies, right? Like this is something that's happened all throughout
But the
history.
interesting thing, though, is also to see how they actually create the everything and they create the opposing factions and at the very root of
Yeah,
everything create opposing factions. It's like
yeah,
I explain in my book in the last chapter, they are the ones who create Reform Judaism, but at the same time, they also create the Zionist revisionist, which are the
yeah.
opposite. So,
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
you have on one side, you have the Likud party, the modern Likud party of Netanyahu, which was created by this Sabbatean Frankist gentleman over here. And at the same time, you have the Reform Jews that were created by the Jewish Enlightenment, heavily inspired by the Sabbatean Frankists, who eventually led the Jews to abandon their own practices and actually perceive those Orthodox people as primitive, even.
Hmm.
Like I state in my book, at one point, Franz Kafka says, who are these people talking Yiddish? There's a kind of tribe from, I mean, almost like the first Zionist who actually, and I explained that, who actually inspired then I mean, the anti-Semitism of the Nazism, unfortunately, was also inspired by the Zionists. And
Hmm. Yeah,
that is, I mean, it's, of course, once you read, you understand, the evolved Jew will say, wow, okay, I realize this and I appreciate what you are making me learn here. But the
yeah,
superficial person, even in Israel, will say, no, 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 you know,
yeah.
because,
I agree.
and so um, I find myself to these days with very few evolved Jews, above the Israelis who have the mindset to understand that this book is like denouncing the Jesuits for the Catholics. It's like denouncing,
Exactly.
know,
Yeah, a hundred
or,
percent.
for example, in Islam, denouncing those sects who have deviated from whatever was the initial path of Islam into some, in a variety of. But then we
Mhm.
see, like, even even the first schism in the Islamic world was created by a Jew called Saba, who
Mm.
created the Shia Muslims, who then became the main persecutors of what? Of the Jews. So then it becomes, and who was Adolf Hitler? He was also. Then you understand that the real enemy of the Jew is the Jew, because then Anton LaVey, what does he say in his statement? He says that for him, the ideal Satanist was the satanic Jew, like
Yeah.
him, like Marilyn
I,
Manson. It becomes a problem, but if
yeah.
you don't have that self-criticism, that's that capacity of accepting that you have done mistakes, that you are not the perfect race, that you shit gold here, or that everything is
Yeah.
perfect that you do,
A
no?
hundred percent. I
Because
mean,
otherwise Moses would not have come down the mountain and got really angry and broken the whole, and broken the
yeah.
Ten Commandments when he saw these people worshiping the golden calf. I mean, that was
Yeah,
the
right away, right?
beginning.
Yeah, even after all the power, yeah. I mean, even after that demonstration of power, but yeah, no, you've done an excellent job, Leo. Like it honestly, it's I would encourage everyone to really get into the things that you're talking about, and also that you confess, Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, right? I mean, that's powerful, man. Like the things that the way that you write, it's really valid for today. Like and I point people to you because you've done the work, and you need to be given credit for that. And in the war, right? I call this the battle for souls, if you will. But
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
yeah, no, I mean,
I mean, the fact that today we are in a situation politically and religiously where
yeah,
everything is so confused when we
yeah,
actually have the possibility, if you have a clear mind, to access all the information which would have been impossible 100 years ago. At one point in my book, as you know, I explained that, for example, even at the time of Crowley, or at the time, it would have been limited the amount of Jewish translations in English of certain things that regard the Kabbalah or other things, or other, it
mhm,
would have been difficult because things were not translated yet as they are now.
no,
We don't have in old times, it was very difficult to have access to archives like we
yeah,
have now. And so today, at the
100%.
touch of a button, if you're an academic, you could really be honest and clear the mind of many people on many misconceptions. But unfortunately, we know the academic world in itself is controlled from these
Yeah,
factions, and so the result is a diluted, impoverished intellectual world in which basically, if you don't believe simply in what is, their own version of history or their own version of religion or their own version of economics or whatever, you are not. Uh, you're not part of the club. You
oh
are
yeah, oh yeah,
despised. I mean, even
yeah,
myself, I find a lot of difficulty. I have very few people within the academic world who embrace me or who follow my work. The few who do that, they actually compliment me. They like what I do.
mhm,
But they are few and scarce because the majority simply like to say, okay. Jago Frank, Shabbat Zev, yeah, whatever. They were simply part of our past in Judaism and in the history of Israel. Yeah, maybe they had a little bit of influence, but now we are in the year 2025. We are a modern. Sorry, but how did you arrive to this point? You are a
yeah,
product
yeah,
of the past. So the fact that a false messiah, or actually two false messiahs, if we calculate Shabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank, they brought you into this extremist Kabbalistic Judaism of the higher Torah in the Roman Catholic and before that in the Islamic world, and that even Jacob Frank, and this is something that not many people discuss, had contacts with the Muslim world and very close contacts with certain Sufi realities, which at the end, if we go and see, for example, the Bektashi, they have very much many similarities because the Bektashi, as I explained in my book, was very much connected with Shabbatai Zevi. And then where does all this evolve in? It evolves in the creation of Nazism by Rudolf Hossenbotten, the founder of the Thule Society. And then, suddenly we find ourselves with Sabbatean Frankists being involved in the very foundation of Nazism. And of course, these are uncomfortable truths when you want to depict
Yeah.
the world in white and black. We are the good, we are the bad.
Yeah, that's right. But it's
It's
just
not,
not that simple. Yeah,
it's
like
not the
it
same.
no. And I just want to highlight too, yeah, like I recommend people reading this one. I don't know if you can see that. Oh yeah. Actually, no, it's not showing up.
It's
That's
volume,
your that's
yes,
your
I'm going to show it, volume
it's
12.
volume 12. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that one yeah,
It's another
highly
great book.
recommend that too. Everything he's written, I think anyone that's interested in knowing what's really going on, you got to read this guy's work because I don't think anyone's done anything quite like what you've done. So and I feel like your motive of intent is right. Like that is huge. That's the real riches to me. Even though like you might not see that material gain, but it's the real riches that you will not. It's like yeah, when you leave this world, man, it doesn't. It's like I don't have to tell you this, but like the real wealth. Sometimes yeah, we do suffer in this lifetime now, but the real riches you're building strong, right? So
Absolutely. But in fact, just to close down this whole
yeah, yeah.
interview
We'll wrap
with
it up.
maybe an interesting thought, my late friend who was a Kabbalist, Ari Benun, once told me, Leo, it's great to be a writer because we can become immortal through our writings. This will
Yeah,
project us in the immortality. And as I remember him, because I was probably the last time with him, like maybe 10 years ago, then I didn't saw him anymore. He died, of course, as he was probably he was old, but I remember that he was a bit of a transgressor himself, when he goes into the fridge and eats a piece of prosciutto, and that is not very kosher. But you see, it's like I met also good people who had the Sabbatean Frankist background. I didn't meet only bad people. I have to admit that there is also good people in every background. So I even met those transgressors of the Mosaico Sinai who were, good people. You could actually engage
yeah,
in a good conversation with them. And, and they will put a smile on and they will actually put you in a good mood because they were not aggressive in the way they
yeah,
were putting through their
yeah,
thing. However, I understand that abandoning the path of your own faith leads
mhm,
you to an uncertainty and that, you know, we should never leave the path of our ancestors, and we should
I agree.
always cherish what they have done for us. And of course, if the Sabbatean Frankists have these ancestors who have committed an untellable sins and a deviance from the Mosaic laws and all that, I understand that that is very heavy. But maybe they should, instead of continuing to be more deviant and to continue bringing this world into the wrong direction, maybe they should admit their sins.
Yeah, that's the
And
start, right? Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
maybe a
Well,
change for once.
absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, Leon Zagami. We really appreciate your time, man. And
All the best.
yeah,
And,
people can find you at leozagami.com, right? On
yeah, with all my
X.
latest articles, of course,
Yeah,
get my latest book, which we have discussed today, and all
yeah.
the other books we have cited, if you don't have them already. And we see each other then for the next maybe literary work of mine. that is already in the works,
Yeah,
at least in my
100%.
head. As soon as I get down to it, then it
Yeah.
takes a few months, but I guess that by next year, maybe
We
we'll have another chat with a new book.
for sure. Yeah, man. I appreciate you. I respect your work, and thanks a lot for your time again, Leo. You
God
have a good
bless
night.
you. Take
Yeah.
care.
See you. Bye. Bye now.